you want to be looking over both shoulders. Milk price is always, I suppose, a huge issue, and where the price of milk is at the moment is not sustainable.
Hello and welcome to AgriFocus. On today's episode, you will hear from both the past and current presidents of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the ICMSA. For over 6 years, Tipperary dairy farmer Pat McCormick's name has been synonymous with the association. But in December 2023, he handed over the reins as president to Kilkenny farmer Dennis Drennan. Agriland spoke to both farmers as the changing of the guard was underway. Our technical dairy writer Brian MacDonald first spoke to Pat McCormick. He began by asking McCormick to discuss the main challenges he believes are facing the dairy sector.
Well, the agricultural sector and predominantly the dairy sector that we represent in the family farm model, there are a number of challenges. One of those that's first and foremost is water quality. And if we can reverse the trend that has been out there in recent times, and agriculture isn't the single emitter of nitrates to affect water quality. There are numerous other emitters, but yet in the general public domain, we see the finger seems to point in our direction, and that's usually frustrating. But we do need to give the science and the adoption at farm level the opportunity to make a difference. Low emission storage spreaders, protected urea, efficient and timely usage of organic nitrogen, and sufficient on-farm slurry storage are probably critical there.
Obviously, you've been now in the role over 10 years and you've been involved in the ICMSA in terms of front of the organisation, from the dairy committee to the vice to the president. But I suppose in all that time, do you think the farmers are now less or more supported by the government? Yeah,
I suppose you could call the Coveney era, and that was when the then Minister Simon Coveney was in office in the Department of Agriculture, a great era where we look forward. While our economy was in decline and in recession, agriculture was seen as the green light, which could deliver an increase in exports, delivered from a rural Ireland perspective, employment and opportunity. To the Creed era where we had a degree of stabilisation, to the era we have today where, there's pressure, there's finger pointing. Maybe there isn't a significant value put on the delivery of food, because if you look over the last number of years at the crisis we've had, whether it was COVID or indeed snowstorms, the first thing to go off the supermarket shelf was consumable foods. And, people are nervous. It is an essential part of living and staying alive. And at times that's undermined.
Kind of looking back at your tenure as president, I suppose, do you have any regrets or disappointments that you'd look back on and say, I kind of hope that had gone differently, or would like that to have gone differently?
Yeah, you'll always have regrets. I suppose within our organisation, I'd like to think that I've no regrets, that I left no stone unturned in trying to be an efficient and relative organisation to lobby on behalf of farmers. And when we needed to go to Ag House or we needed to sit down with the department, we did. I suppose there are many regrets outside of that. And one of those would be the Farm Management Deposit Scheme, which was an income managing volatility, an income tool to manage volatility. And I mean, you take the year 2023, it's probably the greatest case in point in comparison to 2022, where we saw anywhere between 23-25 cents a litre come off the price of milk. Farmers faced with the burden of a huge tax liability for the year 2022 and cash flow extremely tight, and that has put huge pressure out there. I suppose if there was one single thing that I would like to have delivered in that period of time, it was for the family farm model. The sole trader would have been a farm management scheme that would help them through the more challenging years, on the back of nothing other than being able to put away a rainy day fund in better times.
And I suppose you mentioned there kind of going to Ag House and stuff, and I suppose one of the more recent visits, or one of the more publicly noted visits, was around announcement of the derogation drop. And I suppose obviously on that occasion you actually crossed the IFA picket line. And do you feel like that was handled correctly, or how did that kind of sit with you afterwards?
Yeah, look, that whole event was well, nobody won out of that event, I think. Have I any regrets about that day? Certainly not. Contacted on my way into Dawson Street car park, having already seen a group protesting rather than a picket outside, went down to the Budswell to meet some of my colleagues on that given day. met leaders and representatives of other farm organisations who at the time were going in. And I, in conjunction with my executive and with some key personnel around the country, who I saw the feeling of it, felt that this issue was paramount. This issue was the biggest challenge facing the dairy industry since 1983 as regards putting the brakes on our industry, and that we needed to go in and negotiate there. At that point in time, it was very evident that 250 wasn't a runner. That was probably evident from the autumn of 2022, given that that's where water quality results were going to be based on. So we felt that, we needed to get actions taken that would minimise that result and that impact. And hopefully, we'll see those with recognition of reduced protein and recognition of the 0 to 3 month excretion level. And I think that can have a huge impact on dairy farmers. And we must remember, I suppose, that the farmers that were most affected there were dairy farmers. They're predominantly the members of the delegation. But also, on the day, and it's often lost now, was the issue of the overhang from the Farmers' Charter. And I'd have to say, in my time as Deputy President, I had very good working relationship with Tim O'Leary and indeed particularly Eddie Downey at the Farmers' Charter. And that's where you need to be, is around the table. And I suppose there was a number of issues they are facing us from the Farmers' Charter. And on that day, we did get the concession from the department that the ANC payment and the single farm payment, as it was previously known, the BIS, going forward will be paid on the traditional dates.
Just lastly then, I suppose, you kind of mentioned a lot of them already, but it was what do you feel you've achieved as President, and I suppose what's next then for Pat McCormick?
Well, what have I achieved as President? I'd certainly like to say that I was relevant to the farm families, our membership. And I suppose to be relevant, I was fortunate to be probably 45 minutes from the head office for us, which is the John Feely House in Limerick. And that in itself, as well as being probably an hour from the toll bridge in Portlaoise and an hour from Jack Lynch, is at the heartbeat of the dairy industry. And to reflect the impact that policy and policy changes were having on myself and the people in my hinterland at a national level, I think was huge. Look, Brian, I suppose it's fair to say if I had gone out this time 12 months, I may have been a hero because when I came in 2009, we were at 19 cents a litre. Nobody would have thought if I went out 12 months ago that we could achieve 57 cents. But we did on the back of high input costs. And I suppose the challenge, there are huge challenges out there for us as we move forward in the very short term. Live exports, the export of calves next spring, February, March, April is critical that that's maintained and maintained for a number of years. I suppose, I was one of the youngest, if not the youngest ever, maybe national senior farm leader. I'm not sure about the other organisations, but certainly within ICMSA. As somebody in their mid-40s, and that's what I'd say, as you move beyond the 45 mark, I'd like to think that the opportunity to represent people hasn't gone away, and that I will be back in some other format. I'm not going to knock on any doors, but if somebody knocks on my door, I will always listen. It has always been my policy. And if I can contribute to the agricultural sector in the years ahead, I would only be delighted to do so, because it's about securing the future of Ireland, but it's also about securing my own personal income in the years ahead. Predominantly a dairy farmer at the start, a dairy farmer as I finish today, and hopefully a dairy farmer for 20 years to come.
Look, thanks a lot for joining us today, Pat, and appreciate you chatting to us, and best of luck in the future now.
Thank you, Brian. Always been a pleasure to liaise with Agriland and thank yourself, Cormac Farley, and indeed all at Agriland for your courtesy during the last 14 years.
ICMSA former President Pat McCormick there. Agriland's technical dairy writer Brian McDonnell also spoke to the newly appointed president of the ICMSA, Dennis Drennan, on his farm in County Kilkenny. Drennan had held the position of deputy president of the association for the past number of years. Brian McDonnell put to Drennan the question about how he will help dairy farmers address all the challenges they now face in his new era as president.
I think there's a huge need for mature discussion as regards climate change and the effect on the environment, because it's very easy, like for any television station or radio, to focus on farming. Like, okay, it's said that we're responsible for 37% of emissions, but a lot of those emissions are part of a natural cycle. So if you take the cows out in the field, now obviously they're in the shed here at the moment in the wintertime, but for 10 months of the year they're out eating grass. The grass is sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The cow takes that in the form of grass. She breathes out carbon dioxide as we do, as we breathe, and she releases a small amount of methane into the atmosphere every year, about 0.09 of a tonne. And that, after about 10 years, turns back into carbon dioxide and goes back into the grass cycle again. The grass takes it back in. So, like, that's a cycle. Whereas if you get into your car or you turn on your heating at night, you're burning a fossil fuel that's been dug out of the ground after millions of years, and that's releasing extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other toxic chemicals. So I think people need to be made more aware of, like, you know, one lot of emissions are a part of a cycle and they're recycled back through the grass into the cow, back into the atmosphere. But the fossil fuel one is new carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. And I think we need to have a mature discussion about that, and also which emissions are actually necessary. Like, if you're here on the farm here and you're producing milk and cheese and butter or beef or lamb or whatever, as we do in our country, from that grass that's recycling the carbon, that's very different. That's necessity to produce food. We've over 8 billion people in the world. There's a huge number of malnourished. We need to produce food. So I think that those emissions need to be treated differently to the emissions that, you know, we fly off on our holidays to Spain or Portugal or America or wherever it is, that are a choice that we have, but the emissions from food are totally different, I think.
Yeah. And so then just on, obviously, nitrates is a big issue at the minute. A lot of farmers kind of looking at the figures at the minute, figuring out what they're going to have to do with their farm. And also, I suppose we've to look at the kind of the animal welfare end of it as well. And I suppose maintaining that image of the good animal welfare issues going forward. And I suppose, how will you kind of deal with these challenges?
Well, I suppose the animal welfare issue, I think it's we've been a huge advocate of the dairy calf beef scheme. I mean, we need to produce an animal as dairy farmers. We need to produce an animal that's fit for purpose. We need to be incentivized for that, and other people need to be incentivized to rear that animal. Like, so we need to produce a quality animal that's fit for purpose, get it to a certain stage, pass it on to the next farmer who's willing to take on that animal and bring it to beef. Because, like, we've over 60% of the beef kill is now actually coming from the dairy herd. So we need to improve the type of animal that we're producing. There are far more carbon. The meat from a dairy beef animal is far more carbon efficient than it is from any other sector. So what we need to do is really incentivize early slaughter and producing an animal that's fit for purpose. So what we're looking for is €75 payment for the dairy farmer or the person who rears the calf that has a suit fit for purpose, and another €75 for the person who finishes that animal, but on the basis of early slaughter. So that's good for the environment in that sense. As regards the calf welfare issue, look at my predecessor Pat was involved in that program that covered a huge amount of that. Like, there's no acceptance for calves not being treated correctly on farm. There's no acceptance for calves not being treated correctly in a mart, in lairages, in transport, all these things. Like, I mean, there's a huge image out there that the calves reach their destination if they're being exported in terrible conditions. But when you actually visit the veal farms across Europe, they want Irish calves because they actually arrive in better condition and better health than some of the calves that are coming from 2 or 3 hours down the road. So, I mean, there's a bit of a myth out there. Okay, sometimes things happen. There's rules and regulations that need to be enforced during the transport process, and that's what we need to get to.
Obviously, you're just into the role now. So, like, what is do you believe is the biggest challenge facing the Irish dairy sector now?
You're going to be looking over both shoulders. Milk price is always, I suppose, a huge issue, and where the price of milk is at the moment is not sustainable. Just the costs of production, costs of diesel, feed, fertilizer, fuel, contracting charges, everything has just gone completely out of kilter since the invasion of Ukraine. But the price needs to increase to reflect the cost of production. So that's always a huge concern. But I suppose our ability to farm and be the environmentally and economically advantage that we have is our ability to grow grass. for probably 12 months of the year. Like, I mean, even at the moment here we are in December and grass is probably going, I haven't done a measurement for about 10 days, but grass is probably still growing slightly. So we have that unique ability. And I mean, the problem we're going to end up with long term is that if the derogation keeps being cut, Teagasc modelling has proven that it's very minuscule, the effect it has on water quality, the reduction in stock numbers on farms. So why are we chasing? Why are the EU Commission chasing getting rid of stock? We're going to end up in a situation that we'll have more grass than we will have cows to eat it. Because if you look at the research going on in both Moore Park and in Johnstown Castle, David Wall told me recently that they're growing 14.5 tonnes of grass in multi-species swart on 60 kilograms of nitrogen, that's unheard of anywhere in the world. So we have that advantage. We need to maintain our competitive advantage by doing that, but it's going to take time for people to start incorporating multi-species swarts and clover. But it can't be done overnight. You can't just reseed your whole farm. So I would be afraid that as we get better and better at growing grass in a more environmentally friendly way with less reliance on nitrogen, we'll end up that we won't have the cows to eat it, and that's a huge problem. We lose our competitive advantage if that happens.
And I suppose a big issue as well is kind of the perception of the sector. And I suppose how will you kind of change the perception of the dairy sector with the general public and kind of show off the positives, and kind of, because I suppose it's the negatives get highlighted more than the positives?
Well, look, if you take any sector, like no matter which, and I won't pick on any sector, but let it be doctors, nurses, guards, vets, farmers, teachers, lorry drivers, whoever you pick, there's always one or two that flaunt a little bit with the law. But I think the vast majority of farmers are willing to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to look after the cow that's calf, and they want to do their best for the animals that they're in care of. Like, they want to produce the best quality grass for them to eat. They want to keep them in the most comfortable environment possible. And I think people maybe need to get out on farms and see what's actually happening on farms, and the work that's being done by farmers, and the willingness that the hours that they put in to look after. But we're getting to a stage that the reward for putting in those hours is really getting questionable, and that's why we've an issue with younger people getting into the industry.
Just from, I suppose, what you're hearing in terms of the outlook for kind of milk pricing, or obviously dealing with around some of the issues around the nitrates, what is the outlook for 24 for the dairy sector?
I suppose, look, the nitrates is a huge problem. The cost of production is a huge problem at the moment. Like, I mean, we're probably producing milk for the last 6 months at below the cost of production. The new norm is certainly going to have to, the milk price is going to have to begin with a 4, but thankfully I suppose the signs coming from the markets are that that's where it's heading for. We've the Dutch dairy quotes now heading up at 43, 44 cent a litre for butter and skim milk powder or whole milk powder, whichever you want to pick. Global dairy trade is on an upward trajectory. I suppose, look, supply has collapsed everywhere because of both price and because of weather, especially in Ireland now. Our supply has really fallen off a cliff. So it's positive, I suppose, from a milk price point of view. Things are looking good for the new year. You'd certainly be hoping you'd be facing into the new year with a 4 to start it and continue to rise. The nitrates is a huge issue, I suppose. We've been campaigning strong since the derogation was announced back in March, April of 2022. We first met the nitrates division, then we met the minister, then we met the Taoiseach, and then we went to Europe in June of 2022, and they were pretty certain at that stage that there was no movement on the 250 down to 220. So we started looking around the edges, and we're hopeful at the moment that we're going to get the calf excretion rates for the calf for the first 12 weeks that would have been 6 up until now down to 1 kilogram of nitrogen. So that'll be a help on farms, and it should be a help from holding calves on farm that bit longer, that there won't be that pressure on nitrates to move the calves off farm. I suppose the big one is the feed, the protein content in the feed. We've been talking to Lauren Salou extensively over the past, I suppose, year and a half, that it seems if you're willing to cut your protein in your nuts that you feed to your cows during the summer months from April to September, it'll have a huge impact, and it's scientifically proven that it'll have a huge impact on the nitrogen excretion rate from the cow. So the other one, I suppose, is for slurry exportation. There was a massive cut in the slurry from 5 kilograms down to 2.4 kilograms per cubic metre. That looks like it's going to head back up towards 3, so that'll be a bit of a break. But I suppose, on the average herd, 250, 220 was a 12% cut. If you combine those measures, you're probably going to get back maybe 7 or 8% of that. So it's all we can do is the flexibilities around the edges. All this is scientifically proven by Teagasc through Lawrence Salou and his work down in Moore Park. So there's no reason why that can't be implemented for the 1st of January. So that's what we'll be pushing at the meeting that's coming up on Wednesday in Portage.
President of the ICMSA, Dennis Drennan, there finishing out that interview, discussing the new nitrates derogation rules which are now in effect in Ireland, and what the ICMSA had been doing in the weeks prior to the deadline to try and secure some flexibility for farmers. That's all for this episode of AgriFocus. Please do share this podcast with family, friends, neighbours, or anyone who you think might enjoy it. And please do rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so we can continue to bring you more great content from Agriland Media Group. For now, goodbye and take care.